Welcome back. This is day two, and what we're doing is we are drilling down with a lot more detail, as requested by all of you, on our thesis that we are at the very beginning stages of what's going to be the greatest housing boom of not just the U.S. history, but of global history. And yesterday, we painted the picture. We gave you the details, and I think we painted the finer points as to why we thought it was definitely going to happen. Biggest point being, arguably, I think, Julie, was the demographics. The demographics are definitely pointing towards there to be an unprecedented surge of home buying. And so the title of today's podcast is U.S. Housing, Make U.S. Housing Great Again, 25-year surge, a real estate revolution starts in 2025. So our thesis is, and we've been working on this, is that this is the very beginning of what's going to be a 25-year housing boom. Now, we started seeing signs of this, and we started working on this as a concept, if you guys are regular podcast listeners, probably 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, because it's not because Julie and I are so smart, it's just because of demographics. And I'm going to share with you guys, I don't know if you remember this book, Jules. This book, it was written by Harry S. Dent in the 90s, and it was the next big boom or the great boom ahead
or the coming boom, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And you and I were selling real estate at the time. And when the book came out, and the book was certainly not a real estate book, but we stumbled across it and we read it. And we, as a result of that book, changed our real estate business. So before, we were just sanguine with selling houses that were in the first time home buyer, midland price ranges, and that type of thing, like how we grew up. Those same literal communities. But we realized the expansive opportunity was selling more expensive real estate. And the book, this Great Boom Ahead book, not only laid out the case for why that was true, but also what types of housing, where in the country the housing demand was going to be. Harry did such a fantastic job of, I think, stating his case that we, as a result of that, frankly, benefited financially. We still are, because we read what he said, we thought about what he said, and we then took action on what he said. And I'm hoping that, in some ways, this podcast, the series that we've been doing, and this recurring theme that we pick up now and then about this being the start of the 25-year housing boom, I hope that that's going to have the same impact on all of you as Harry S.'s book did on us 30 some years ago. So you remember when we first read that?
I do.
Yeah.
I totally remember that.
Well, I'm a big advocate that if someone helps to lift you up, even if they do it inadvertently, a book that you read from an author, right? You always give people recognition that helped you along your way. And you and I have been blessed with many people who have indirectly and directly helped us along our 3 decades long sojourn to where we are today.
Yeah, 100%.
So, what were your big carryovers from yesterday's topics? What was your overarching feeling? What was some of the feedback you were getting from your coaching clients? And today is part 2. So we're going to pick up at point number 7 today.
Yeah, well, I had several people tell me that they were not as aware of all the new construction happening in and around their market until they listened to us saying, hey, find out what's happening with the building permits, who's been building land. Excuse me. And, in some cases, builders have been gobbling up land since the last, housing recession before this past couple of years. Especially the bigger builders have owned just acres and acres and acres. Just because you don't see something starting right now doesn't mean that it's not coming. And just because there's not a sign in that 100-acre, patch of dirt or cornfield doesn't mean something's not coming. So I've had a lot of people have aha moments saying, I need to be more frosty on that because it's not necessarily just right there in your MLS. Some people have said they've set up Google alerts around their town and some of the news for, the new construction permits. I know, I'm licensed in Texas and I'm still part of our neighborhood news from Georgetown. And every now and then it'll pop up a report, building permit taken out by this builder because of this transaction where this farmer, where you drive by and there's still cows on, out yonder.
Let me tell you the shortcut for that.
Stuff. Yeah,
okay,
go ahead.
So a lot of the biggest builders are publicly traded. And so they have to do quarterly filings. And I think they're called 10Ks, pretty sure. That's where the information would be about what areas they're expanding to, because they're publicly traded. They have to disclose all kinds of things that a private company would never have to disclose. So if you want to know where some of these companies, and you want to use Google Alerts, where some of these companies are expanding to, make sure, frankly, you can use Grok OpenAI to an extent, though Julie and I are finding Grok to be 1,000 times better than OpenAI. But you can use Grok and have it go into and just set this up so it's a monthly reminder for you or a quarterly reminder, and have it search the public filings of the largest builders and see if they have, plotted any plans to expansion in your particular market. Because it's going to happen fast and it's going to happen everywhere. And all of this is, so we know somebody that is in the land development business in Arizona, and his business is taking off. All kinds of builders that are, so the problem with just looking for who the person is that bought the land, it'll be through a holding company and you won't necessarily know it was
That's
Pulte
true.
or it wasn't
Yeah.
DR Horton. So you got to kind of,
Hmm.
go about it in a different way. And why is that important? Well, I mean, you're going to know that if there's going to be new construction that's going to starting up, you want to be, frankly, following our path that we created for you guys in Premier Coaching to learn more about new construction. Because I'm not suggesting you work for the builders necessarily, but if you can work with the
Good.
builders on some of their new
Hmm.
construction developments, the opportunity for you to make money in some of these communities is going to be ridiculous, unprecedented. So yeah, so open your mind. And again, you love the podcast. We know you do based on the downloads and the views and all the sharing that folks do. So please do consider joining Premier Coaching. And Premier Coaching is free for you to join right now. It's free for the first 30 days. There are no contracts. You can cancel at any time. And even during the trial period, you get a daily semi-private coaching call with one of our Harris certified coaches. And that includes, with Premier Coaching, all of the first level of Premier, which is a lot of the things that we reference on the podcast, the action plans, the survival guide, some of the scripts, things like that. So make sure you go and you participate in Premier Coaching just by simply going to premiercoaching.com. And for those of you who've been closely following along, you guys know that we've been working on our really what became a passion project, which is called Ethical Real Estate Professional. Ethical Real Estate Professional is now included with Premier Coaching. We were going to make it a separate thing, a designation that was not going to be attached to Premier Coaching. But we realized the only, or frankly, the best way for us to deliver the ethical real estate professional content was to do it with Premier Coaching. So when you join Premier Coaching, you will have access to ethical real estate professional as well. If you don't know what I'm talking about and you're curious, which you probably are going to be, ethical real estate professional is what we know to be the ultimate branding tool that's going to truly differentiate yourself in the marketplace. And it is by definition something that not every agent's going to have, because we're only going to allow 2,500 agents to ever become ethical real estate professionals. So do consider joining Ethical Real Estate Professional. And if you want to check out the website, just go to ethicalrealestateprofessional.com. But remember, the only way for you to earn the Ethical Real Estate Professional designation is by joining Premier Coaching. Click the link below or just go to premiercoaching.com. All right, Julie Harris, let's pick up where we left off yesterday with point number 7.
Point number 7, we need to talk about tariffs. 2025 tariffs are sparking manufacturing and housing gold mines. How so? Well, again, the manufacturing that creates some demand, and some examples would be TSMC, $100 billion Arizona plants. That's going to bring 25,000 new jobs. Think about relocation. Think about people who maybe are already local, but they're going to go and apply for those jobs, crosstown moving, and certainly people. How many people have always wanted to move to Arizona just for the weather, and now they find out this is opening up and they go get a job there? So if you're not frosty on relocation, that would be something to look into. In Buckeye and Maricopa County, which is outside of Phoenix, that's a lot of building as well. In Ohio, Eli Lilly has just announced a $2 billion project. There's a company called Clarios, $1.5 billion for Indiana, and BMW, of course, South Carolina. They're expanding what they're building there as well. So those are just a few examples. There's tons of examples. Right when tariffs were being discussed, the hot topic was, what was it? I think Honda stopped building their new plant in Mexico and decided, was it Marysville? I can't remember.
Yeah, Marysville. No,
Yeah,
no,
I
they're
think
building it. They're going to build it in Indiana. The
Indiana.
Civics. They're
Yeah.
building in Mexico. They're going. But here's something interesting. As far as the tariffs go, you guys got to be super careful. You don't allow your brain and your potential thinking about this to be corrupted from politics. So if you think we're being political right now with what I'm about to tell you, that's in your head. It's not in mine, or it's not our intention to be political. All right. So I want to say something that's very interesting. Again, when exploring this point and trying to really understand the ramifications of tariffs, there is lots of historical precedents for tariffs working, and I'll just summarize it for you relatively quick in the best way I can. So before there was income taxes, there were tariffs, and there is absolutely math that's out there that can validate the fact that all U.S. Essentially the cost to run the government can be paid for by tariffs. And I realize that it's a political hot button because all the usual reasons. Do your own homework on this. Julie, excuse me, Julie and I've done podcasts about discussing tariffs to try to move your mind away from the realization, and, away from the idea that they're bad. And I want you to start gravitating towards having an open mind to the realization that they're good. And I'll give you another, for example. Um, First of all, the goal with tariffs is to eliminate U.S. income taxes. They've already said, and I bet you they do this within the next year or two, to get rid of all income taxes on people earning less than $150,000 a year, getting rid of income taxes on people on Social Security, getting rid of income taxes on people that are earning money through wages and tips and things like that. So how are they going to pay for all that? Or first of all, they're going to reduce expenses. That's what DOGE is largely doing. And I definitely taking a different approach to government in general, but they're also going to essentially replace income taxes with tariffs. Now, tariffs, the history of tariffs, this is where, I'm sorry if I'm boring you, but this is interesting, I promise. Tariffs, the reason that they're so unequal around the world. So US, for the example, if an item from the United States is imported to most countries in the world, the tariff is huge comparatively to if from that particular country is imported into the United States. So after World War II, and this part I didn't know until yesterday, Julie, I didn't tell you this. After World War II, because of the fact that we were essentially the only country that wasn't in rebuilding phase, and we weren't destroyed, we had an ocean distance from the whole thing. We had,
Sure.
We had all kinds of benefits. We had an enormous growth. We had, obviously U.S. currency became the global reserve currency and all the rest of it. But what we did is we allowed those foreign countries to tariff the snot out of our imported goods. This is going back to World War II, because after all, they needed to support their local industry rebuilding. So the United States said, well, it's fine. You can tariff the crap out of our this and the other things and whatever. And what's happened is that thing in history has carried over to this day. So all the current administration is doing, and you can check the math on this, is they're just matching tit for tat. So if you're tariffing our wine at 8% or whatever the hell it is, we're going to do the same thing to you. That's all they're doing. They're making
That's the reciprocal tariff plan.
Right, the reciprocal tariff plan. That's unlike, for example, like a lot has been made about the tariffs against Canada and Mexico. And the Canada and Mexico tariffs were basically because obviously there's an issue with illegal immigration. And so they're maybe being penalized more than, say, for example, that had not been an issue. So when you're cutting through all this, I want you to kind of do your own homework on this, but understand the end game is to get rid of federal taxes for everyone. Now, I want you to think big picture. Let's say that takes a while, because it's going to take a while. Okay, so let's say the first people that stop paying taxes are people on Social Security, people that are tip earners, people earning less than 150 grand. And then it's 250 grand, then it's 350 grand, then it's 500 grand, then it's $1 million. No federal taxes now on anybody. What is that going to do to migration of high wage earners? How many people from other countries who have the ability to start their own businesses, who have lots of money, are going to want to go to the United States, which is already, arguably the best country on planet Earth? How many of them are going to want to now move here because there's no income taxes? And so if you want to validate what I'm saying as being a viable sort of interesting way forward, look at the 11 states in the country. Look at what are the states in the country that have the fastest growth? Number of people moving in versus out. Oh, I don't know. Let's see. Oh, I know. They have no state tax. Low or no
tax. Yeah.
Right. Florida, North Dakota, Tennessee. I mean,
Texas.
They have Texas. They have no state taxes. And so they're trying to essentially, be more competitive with other states to bring in those higher wage earners, because the higher wage earners can save 5%, 10% if they live in, say, for example, Tennessee versus if they live in, say, for example, New Jersey or something like that. You guys getting what we're saying? So the United States can play that same game, and they could start competing against other countries that have ridiculous personal income taxes. Julie has a great coaching client. He's the number one agent in what market in Canada?
Oh, and on Orangeville, which is near Ontario.
John Walkinshaw, right? Yeah. So he's the number one agent. He's been a coaching client forever. He's with us at in our EXP Realty group. He pays over 50%. Wasn't it like 60?
All in, it's between 51 and 55%. It's outrageous.
Yeah, in taxes per year. And then if you're in California and you're earning, I think it was $1 million, the amount of money you actually earn that you take home after state and federal is like 425,000 or something like that.
Yeah.
And that's before your sales taxes, and that's before property taxes if you own a home, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So the point is that taxes are a fantastic way to encourage people's behavior, right? Follow the incentives. And so if the United States could get to the point, full circle here on the whole tariff conversation, where we are offering incentives, financial incentives for people to want to move here, and they're high wage earners, because lower taxes isn't going to mean anyone doing a different country that's not earning any income, right? Then imagine the immigration waves of the folks that are going to be moving in the United States that are going to be higher wage earners, and what types of homes are they going to buy, dear listener? Where are they going to want to move? Yeah. So if you really unring the bell and you unpoliticize all of these conversations about what's happening with tariffs, what's happening, again, Julie touched on this. Tariffs are already, who is the guy? The guy who owns the big hedge fund, who's Japanese. He was the guy that was the big funder behind Compass Realty. Do you remember?
I don't remember his name off the top of my head, but yeah.
Yeah. So he pledged to invest, I think it was $100 billion in U.S. startups, $100 billion and U.S. domestic based companies.
For example.
Yeah, for example. And so the amount of companies that are going to be, well, we read something like, Julie, where's that website you go to, us.gov or whatever it is?
Whitehouse.gov?
Whitehouse.gov, yeah. Where they're doing some of these announcements. Like, we only hear about the big chip manufacturer and the company making, whatever that's, moving their manufacturing facility in the United States. But the number of companies that are doing this is extraordinary, because they don't want to have to pay a reciprocal tariff of 10 or 20%, because that would eviscerate their margins. And so what they're doing is they're saying, hey, U.S. government, if we're going to open up our, widget making manufacturer, and we're going to do it in, Indiana, in some rural area, what kind of deal can we make? And that's what they're starting to do. And that's going to, what's that going to happen as a result? It's going to create local jobs. It's going to create new towns. It's going to create new synergy within those whole geographic areas, which tees you up perfectly for point number 8, Julie Harris.
Point number 8, boomtowns erupting. Your stage is set for this. There are hubs exploding specifically. We promised yesterday we'd tell you some examples. Phoenix suburbs, Marysville, Ohio, Kokomo, Indiana, Greer, South Carolina. And Texas has a $17 billion Samsung plant going in Taylor. Remember Taylor, the little town near where we used to live in Georgetown? So those are just a handful of examples. And you mentioned whitehouse.gov. They have a little news section on there that has a lot of these types of announcements.
Taylor? That tiny little ghost town?
Yeah.
It wasn't literally a ghost town?
Basically. It's it wasn't as bad as a couple of them, but yeah, they use basically 1 or 2 intersections, I think.
That's incredible.
Yeah, which is really a kind of out there suburb of Austin, but that's a great example, right? So you should be knowing what's going on in your town. Even, like some of these, Marysville is adjacent to Columbus, for example. Georgetown is adjacent to Austin. Kokomo is near Indianapolis. So if you're in Indianapolis saying, well, nothing's going on around me, well, maybe that's true. Maybe it's not. Maybe you're one county away from where things are happening. So you want to be frosty about that. And I do get some of that information from whitehouse.gov, the news section there. But you can set up, as we talked about earlier, some searches for yourself.
The cities, Julie, will be largely the ones that will not benefit from a lot of what we're talking about, because their existing infrastructure, they're landlocked.
And the expense.
And the expense, right. They have too many existing expenses, too many, unfunded liabilities and all these other things. They're not going to be the ones that benefit.
But it'll be adjacent to them. It'll be maybe a 20-mile drive or, a half an hour drive. And, think about Vivek Ramaswamy of Ohio running for governor on the premise of our previous point, plus this point is, bringing manufacturing in, but he wants to make Ohio a zero state tax state. So yeah, there's a lot of thought about this, and it's not going to happen overnight, but it's something to really stay frosty on. So let's see our next one. Yeah.
Julie, I would, if he got rid of state taxes, I would be interested in moving back one day, but he'd also have to get rid of winter.
Hey, you never know. Elon's around. He could figure that crap out.
That's right.
So we'll see. All right. So let's talk about point number 9, which is technology. Technology is going to fuel or be part of the fuel for new construction. Another one of our hot topics. So think about this. Again, our overreaching thing is not, it is about housing, but it's also about the impact that housing and the housing market has on the economy. For example, each home generates at least 3 jobs, $150,000 in activity. That's according to the National Home Builders Association. Modular homes are growing now 20 to 50% faster and are 10 to 20% cheaper. There's nothing saying that every new, first time buyer house has to be 450,000. We have these different types of homes that are now being built with different types of technology. One of my coaching clients in Phoenix has a 3D printed entire neighborhood. This is not just like a one-off house in a field someplace. This is a complete neighborhood, which is right next to a higher end neighborhood. I think that she said the average is about 475 there. So let's see, what else do we have? 3D printing homes. That's happening a lot in Texas. Those are built faster and cheaper. Solar homes can cut your cost by 40%. Millennials especially like that. All of this. Yeah,
Jules,
go ahead.
we didn't talk about this yesterday, and it's not on any of these points either. But one of the other things that's going to happen is you talked about solar and all the rest of it. There is a lot of momentum right now with the new head of the Department of Energy around doing nuclear. And some of the new nuclear plants that they're going to most likely be looking into building have already proven to have a zero probability of any kind of meltdown. So nuclear of all forms of energy is actually the least expensive. Did you know that?
Mm-mm.
Yeah, I didn't either
Makes
until I
sense.
researched
Yeah.
it. So nuclear is actually cheaper to build and maintain over time than even solar. And solar, sunlight's free. So you could build relatively small nuclear power plants that would easily create energy. And I want you to think about this. So it was Microsoft. If this doesn't sound like a Bond villain story, nothing will. So there was a decommissioned nuclear power plant. I did mention this to you like 2 months ago.
Yeah.
A decommissioned nuclear power plant. I don't remember, someplace on the East Coast, if I'm remembering correctly. Maybe it was Michigan or something, but it was this scuttled nuclear power plant. Microsoft bought, and Microsoft's going to own a nuclear power plant. Why did they buy it? Because they're creating an energy source for AI. And so obviously energy is the
Crazy.
great, line of delineation for what AI model works the fastest. And if Microsoft now can make their own energy, I mean, think about
Why not?
that.
I know.
I mean, remember The Simpsons, the guy that owned the nuclear power plant?
That's right. Exactly. Well, now it's moving in a state near you.
Yeah.
All right. That is interesting, though. A lot of these efficiencies. And, on yesterday's podcast, we were talking about all of the things besides the purchase price and the interest rate that make homes more expensive and less affordable. Energy and efficiency and cost to build it in the first place and the cost to acquire land and all of these things all contribute to that.
And by the way, we should have, on our point yesterday about Fannie Freddie coming out of conservatorship, and we did touch on this, but it's really worth mentioning again. A lot of the financing right now is only available to certain types of homes. Obviously, you have primarily stick-based homes, frame and whatnot. And so you can, but it's harder to get financing on anything that's perceived to be a modular or a mobile or whatever the hell you want to call it. And that's where the growth can be. And it's also interesting that a lot of the 3D homes, because they're not stick-based, are also falling into the same unfinanceable bucket as a modular home, all this stuff. So what's going to happen again, and they have already said this, the new housing czars, if you want to call them that, though calling somebody who works for the U.S. government a czar never has made sense.
I know.
But
It bothers me too.
it doesn't make sense. Isn't that like a Russian term? But
Like
anyway.
a Russian oligarch type of thing.
Exactly, but
whatever.
whatever. Yeah, exactly. Moving on. Nothing to see here. So yes, a lot of the housing folks are already advocating for the reality that we need to be making Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac financing available to other homes other than just traditionally built stick homes. And we did learn this the other day. Fannie and Freddie, you guys watch for this, okay? We love being the purveyor of new housing news, that even the super wonky, nerdy stuff. It's going to now be referred to as F2. F2 as in Frank and then the number 2. So you're going to start
Easier
seeing
to
that.
say.
You're going to start seeing that in the news. Okay. All right, Julie, let's move on.
And by the way, who was it last week? Maybe it was Pulte that we heard interviewed, said that there is going to be somebody hired this week called the Affordability Czar.
Yeah.
to get back to czars, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, well, but it all goes back to our point that to make housing great again. And though Trump hasn't officially said it, and we're not trying to somebody in Instagram tried to fillet us for stealing something from Trump. Obviously, this person didn't listen to the podcast, but we are giving Trump, we are kind of guessing that that's what he's going to call it again. I think it's probably a safe guess, but there is going to be a big housing initiative that's going to be announced. You can already see, he's already setting the chess table with all these new people that he's putting. Yeah.
Remember what he's a real estate developer. This could not be any more in his wheelhouse. He is a real estate guy. So whether you like Trump or not, that is a fact.
That's true. And some of the, he's a real estate guy who's famous for basically making perceivably impossible deals happen. You all remember the ice rink that was left unfinished and cost the city of New York like tens of millions of dollars. And it was just people just giving up on it. We'll never have an ice rink again. And this was back, gosh, 90s, 80s maybe. And Trump said, I can get this thing done in 6 months for like 57 cents. And he did. He did. and he had such a surplus left over of the budget that the city gave him. He was able to then go rehab adjacent restaurants and such. You guys don't hear these stories, do you?
Like he likes this kind of thing.
He likes the challenge. And all these people that he's put in place, Julie and I are listening to interviews and we're reading like crazy, especially the ones on the housing side of the equation, trying to get in their heads and understand how they're thinking. That's where our motivation for some of these points have come from, because we've heard them saying a lot of the things that we're parroting back to you guys.
Yeah, you got to stay in touch. All right. Point number 10, 2025's crash-proof foundation for 25 years. Now, people love to say, oh, things got too expensive. It has to crash. What goes up must come down. But in fact, there are lots of reasons. We do talk about this a lot on the podcast because it just keeps on coming up. And I know that our listeners get bombed with emails and they see stuff posted on Instagram. Oh, the world's going to come to an end. It's inevitable because this time's just like last time.
I got one the other day. I got one the other day. Yeah. And what it was is he was obscuring the facts. He was trying to sell folks, agents, to obviously get on some list and or some, buy something for whatever amount of money it was. But he was talking about the increase in either pre-foreclosures or something in Dallas. And he didn't talk in a specific area in Dallas. But what he didn't talk about, he said there's, I think it was 34% or 134%. What he didn't talk about was the before number and then the after number and how that correlates to the historically what the number of defaults are in that particular community. So in other words, he was writing a headline that was designed to be deceptive, clearly.
Well, remember, if a default rate of 1% becomes a default rate of 2%, you had a 100% increase.
Yeah, that's what he said. Yeah. So it's basically, there was a big, huge increase, blah, 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 blah. And agents who are ill-informed are not going to want to think to, or not going to stop to think, well, I wonder what the basis for that is. Does that mean we're going to go from 10 foreclosures to 15? Oh, there's a 50% increase. Yikes. What does it actually mean? You guys see how these people that are trying to manipulate you into believing there's a housing crash, they are obviously trying to sell you guys into some alternative version of the future because they want to sell you some widget. That is got to be, because there is no valid argument to be had. And we've looked for it for why there would be any kind of anything other than a continuation of a long-term, decades-long housing boom. Now, boom doesn't mean a boom bubble. That's not what I mean. We mean an ever-increasing increase in home sales, housing demand, appreciation, all the good things.
Steady increases.
Exactly.
Yes. And don't you guys who are longtime listeners think that if we thought or saw or read or studied something to the contrary, that we would be telling you about it? Of course, you know that we would. Okay, so no crash in the future. 40% of homes, that's 56 million, according to the census last year, 40% are mortgage free. You can't become upside down and be foreclosed on something that you don't have a loan on. Just saying. Okay. 80% or 84 million with mortgages have an interest rate locked in at 5% or less. That's according to Freddie Mac. Okay. So that's a difference. Let's see. That gives a little bit of math. Lots of savings there. Equity hits 32 trillion. Let's see. Skeptics fear bubbles, but low debt, strict lending. That's another thing that people forget about. The lending practices right now are nothing like what lending was that caused the mortgage-backed security subprime loan, housing crash. Nothing like that. And I often bring this up with agents when they're going through like, oh, I can't believe all these strict requirements that my buyers or somebody whose borrowers are getting a loan on your listing. I can't believe they have to jump through all these fiery burning hoops. That's a good thing. That is definitely a
Well, it sort
stopgap
of is. It sort of is. It's
to a degree.
stupidity,
But
Julie. It's stupidity from essentially the aristocracy that's been running Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and a
I
lot of
don't
that
mean
stuff.
PMI. I mean some of the things like you have to prove you have a job.
Yeah,
Some
obviously.
like it's far superior to a ninja loan, no income, job, or assets. How do you think that was going to go? We
But
don't have that stuff anymore.
let's hit them with the high points, okay? So
Sure.
of the all the homes in the United States, 40% have no loans. They could obviously stop paying their taxes and run into some sort of tax foreclosure, but
Yeah,
that
but they have
aside,
tons of equity. They have nothing but equity, so they could
right?
sell it, downsize, cash out, whatever.
Okay, so of the rest of the homes that have, and I didn't drill down that much in these notes. And by the way, these notes that we're giving you guys now are chock full of numbers and facts. And if you want these notes, which I know you will, if you want to use them for your own education, you want to use them for social media, you want to use them for your own, it doesn't matter what, your own podcast, you've got to go to harrisrealestatedaily.com and get our notes. Just drop in your email address. It doesn't cost you anything. And then you'll start getting the notes every day. But here's an overview of how this actually works. I'm rounding numbers up and I'm rounding numbers back down, but you guys are going to conceptually understand what I'm saying. Of all the homes in the United States, something like 50%, or Julie said 40%, have no mortgage. Of the remainder homes, of the remainder of the homes for sale, or I'm sorry, of the existing residential inventory or homes, I think half of them with mortgages have mortgages, and half of those have interest rates less than 3.5%. And then I think it was half, like 50% have less than 3.5% interest rates, and 50%, not of that 50%, but 50% of the ones with mortgages have at least 50% equity. It's something like that.
That's right. Well, there's $32 trillion worth of equity in the country.
Yeah.
And, historically and statistically, people don't tend to default on mortgages where they have a really killer interest rate locked in, because also statistically, we know from the previous housing crash that once you are a homeowner or you were a homeowner, you absolutely want to be a homeowner again. Even if you did have a hardship, you're going to want to be a homeowner again. So you're less likely to break up with your super low interest rate. That's part of why we have an inventory issue, but we're starting to work out of some of that. But the point is that this is completely different than anything that caused the crisis last time, because people do have equity, prices are not falling, and interest rates are by and large locked in, and you have nearly half the country with no mortgage at all. So those are all good reasons for no crash.
We did a podcast in the last 3 weeks, Julie, that was specifically about why there was no housing crash. This is just one point, but I think we did 10 points where we were really drilling down on micro markets and actual facts around this. But if you want to listen to that podcast, you want to get those notes, you know what to do. You can go back to iTunes or Stitcher, Spotify, or YouTube and listen to that show. I believe it was, "Is There a Housing Crash Coming?" or something like that was the title of it. So go back and consume that one, and you guys will be all caught up on the reason that there really is nobody is going to tell you that there's a house. Okay, so you could argue, and it's about as far reaching as you could possibly get, what would invalidate some of our points, but not completely, only partially. Why wouldn't there be a start of a 25-year housing boom now? Well, there could be a black swan event. Thus, I mean, I guess alien invasion, that's possible. There could be some sort of global, war. There could be all kinds of shit that happens. There could be.
I would even argue against that. Didn't we all just live through COVID, which was kind of the biggest black swan event that any of us has ever experienced? And what happened? It wasn't a housing crash. I don't know if you guys remember. It was more of a housing boom.
Well, right? but also all it would do, it was there. You can't change demographics. Right. So the sheer number of people that are going to be in the housing market, if there's some sort of recession, they might not buy or sell this year or next year. They're just going to put it off until the economy starts to feel a little bit more comfortable for them. So you're not going to get rid of the number of people that want to buy or sell real estate. And it is a unprecedented amount of people in global history, or the amount of transactions that will inevitably happen over the next 25 years. All right, Jules, let's go on to point number 11. Now, I'm unfortunately going to have to again remind you guys to go get our notes at harrisrealestatedaily.com, because this is where we really get into the weeds. So Julie, if you could read this kind of slow, and so they could just really get it into their heads.
A lot of numbers here.
There's a lot, but it's a lot of numbers, but it's really very fascinating. So please just get our notes so you can share this with other people.
This is really important. We're talking about point number 11, wealth building explodes. And your legacy can begin here. We're talking about how you can build wealth through homeownership. For example, a $300,000 home with 5% down hits potentially 1.3 million by 2050. So let's say you bought that and you just kept it for 25 years. That $300,000 home, using an average of 5% appreciation, there'll be some years more, some years less, will then be worth $1.3 million 25 years later. Let's do another example. Let's see, which, that nets the owner $1 million just
And Julie,
because they kept that house.
That was based on 5% appreciation, but I would argue that it's inflation again.
Sure.
But yes, 5% appreciation, and that's according to the FHFA. Okay, so if you bought a house today, and Julie, the math, it gets even more interesting because there's case studies that I did.
Yep,
but
I see 'em.
yes, versus, okay, go ahead. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to jump on your.
It's okay. So homeowner can reach $1.5 million net worth versus renters. Now let's compare that $300,000 home that they put 5% down and they kept for 25 years using a 5% average appreciation. Again, some years will be different than others, but as an average. So let's say that a renter, the rent goes from $1,500 to $3,600 by 2050. That's using a 3% increase. While payments stay on the house $1,500. So for example, picture this: kids grow up in a $1 million asset, right? You raise your kids as you're building $1 million net worth by only keeping the house and making your monthly payment for 25 years. So let's compare a net worth of owners versus renters. This kind of goes to the talking point of people saying, well, it's too expensive to buy a house and you could just rent forever and that's better. Okay, well, let's look at the actual numbers. We call this facting. Okay, so net worth of owner versus renter. If we look at between 2025 and 2055, we've got two 30-year-olds. Okay, they each have $50,000 worth of savings, a $75,000 income, and the owner buys a $300,000 house with 20% down and using a 4 to 5% appreciation. Okay, that's your owner. The renter pays $1,500 a month with yearly 3% increases, $60,000.
He invests, Joel. Right. So that's right. So he invests that 6% and he puts it into the whatever return on investment, and he's not pulling any of the money out. He's letting the interest on that investment compound, and the rate's at 7%. Right. So we're using relatively conservative.
Yes.
I think.
And also a big assumption that a renter is going to invest that consistently, which may or may not be true. I'm sure there are some that do, but go ahead.
Well, I mean, you just touched on something, and my mind goes all over the place, because if you look at, and we'll go back to the numbers here in a second. These are real estate people. So unless it's 3% or 6%, their number.
Right.
Yeah. Right. So if you look at, for example, the amount of wealth that a renter or that an owner will accumulate passively and almost accidentally over their lifetimes of owning a home versus being a renter, it's the difference between being able to retire comfortably. Because let's say, for example, you do have a HELOC against your house. You need to pull out money occasionally to pay for the expense. If you're a renter, you're going to have to pull the money out of your stock market portfolio, which means you're going to create a capital gain. You're going to create taxes. So let's say it's 10 years into this whole scenario and you need to borrow money because your kid needs braces. You pull that money out, you sell the stock, you have a capital gain. You could borrow against your portfolio, but that's not necessarily the best move. But you're going to have if you go and borrow money against your house on a HELOC, there's no taxes on that. So if you look at a house as nothing other than a plan like B, in case, your other forms of savings don't work out, in case the stars don't ever actually perfectly align with you, in case, it doesn't turn out Elon Musk is your cousin, that your rich Uncle Bob doesn't leave you squat. You guys get it? Owning a home is your hedge against being broke when you're old. That is really, truly what it is.
That's true.
But the other benefits from owning a home, and unfortunately it didn't make it to these notes, but it's more, I want you to think about, there's been all kinds of research that's been done on the quality. Ooh, I don't like that word because someone's going to be offended, but I don't care. The quality of living in a community that's mostly homeowners versus mostly renters. And so if you have a community and you guys have experienced this too. if you are living like where we live, just to use this as an example, there's a hotel that shares the grounds where we live in our community, 1,300-acre area, and we will run into what we call them tourists all the time. And the tourists do not even bother to say hi. They're on vacation, they're doing their tourist thing. But the locals go way out of their way to try to, get to know people.
Community building. Yeah.
Community building. So the nature of living in a community and raising your family, and maybe your family is your dog and your goldfish, and a community that's mostly homeowners, the very vibe in that community is significantly different than if it's mostly tenants. And you guys have all probably
Yes.
experienced this. You know exactly what I'm talking
I'll
about.
give you another example based on, what these guys experience all the time. To prove that fact that it is more stable and a better quality of life to be surrounded by owners. Why do you think that FHA won't lend on condo buildings that have, over a certain percentage of owners? Because their risk management,
certain percentage of
renters versus owners. Okay. So and it's usually like 30 or 40% can't be, in some places it's 20% can't be rental units. They want owners. Why? Because their risk management oversight gurus say, we have determined that it is too risky to lend on a building like that or to lend on a community like that. It's not just because we're saying quality because our opinion, it's because this has been studied by people, by economists and by, people that are risk management lender overlays for mortgage loans.
It's human nature, though. I mean, it's human
Sure it
nature.
is.
When there's something, it's not societal.
It's how much you're invested in the community, quite literally, not just financially, but mentally and emotionally.
Totally. And that's going to go to the schools. That's going to go to the services that are around the residential community. You guys should all, you're in real estate, so you know what we're saying is true. Some people I'm not insensitive to the folks that are renters. I'm not because my parents didn't buy a house until I was almost 10, right? So we rented. And I can tell you for sure that living in those rental communities, the neighbors, with a few exceptions, they were sketch for sure. Versus when you moved,
and they weren't even consistently the same neighbors either. They moved.
No, I know exactly. Well, people wouldn't take care of their places. The transitory nature of living in an area that's mostly renters is palatable, especially after you've lived in your own home. And the American dream is to live in your own home. There's something in our DNA that makes us want to own a home. We want to own our own thing. And that's one of the tenets of basically what it means to be an American, to own property, to have that your own little slice of America. That's the reason, like for a long time, if you're our age or probably certainly older, but definitely a little bit younger too, the American dream was to own your own home. And you guys, we talked about this yesterday, and you guys noticed how it was really during, I think, the Obama administration after the housing boom. No one was really saying that anymore. They're all just saying, oh, the next generation of people, they're going to want to be transitory. They're going to want to rent. They're going to want to live in these little, storage sheds and call them micro houses and all the rest of this. And I was like, in what world will somebody want to live in a, 300 square foot house their whole day? I whole lives. That doesn't even. So in any event, the nature of a community that is mostly owners and does have some tenants, of course, is always going to be more desirable. It's going to create a more desirable community. It's going to create a more desirable basis of people to continue building the schools and the churches and the synagogues and the mosques, I suppose, and all the other things. And like when you're thinking about, and we could talk forever about this. Hopefully all of you are convinced what we're saying is true. And so if you're wanting to know why make housing great again is going to be so pivotal and the make America great again. And I know this sounds political, but I don't mean for it to be. No. It's because there has to be a foundational shift away from or towards people knowing that they can own their own homes. And think about how much angst will be resolved if all of a sudden people are owning things. If all of a sudden people are owning a home and they're actually invested in the country, they're actually invested in their communities, everything changes. Yeah, and, you guys can call it traditional values if you want to, and I suppose maybe it is, but it also was what our country was based on, is property ownership. It was one of the biggest reasons why our country was formed, because our folks, the founders of our country, wanted to own property. and
That's
they
true.
didn't want to be, attached to some ancient feudal system. You could argue that socialism is sort of like that too.
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully all this is resonating with you guys. I think it probably is. For the most part, real estate people are nice conservative folks like you and I, Julie.
Generally speaking,
Yeah,
right? I think we have true believers listening for the most part.
we do.
So our final point has a lot of stats and facts that they can get in the newsletter. But I think that the summary really is that it should be your golden era, whether
Well,
you're
no, I
just,
want to, Jules, I don't want to blaze over this because this is really
which ones do you want?
fascinating.
There's a lot here
Okay,
that are kind of mixed together.
point number 12, you can read it and then I'll translate it, okay?
Okay, I'll do it a little bit at a time.
But let me tell them what the premise of this was, all right?
Sure.
So there are so many I was about to say a bad word and I stopped myself. There's so many poop talking people out there that are pontificating about how there's going to be some sort of event that's going to cause agents to drop like flies, and the industry is going to number of agents is going to drop by half. And anytime you hear anybody say that, I want you to ask them based on what, and then they're always going to say the same thing, based on my past experience. And then you say, okay, what past experience are you referring to? When in the past has there been a time that's like this demographically, that's been like this growth-wise, that's been like this, all the things that we've told you over the last 2 days? When in the history of the United States for residential housing has there been any parallel to what's happening now? And you know what they'll come up with? Nothing. So what they're going to say is, well, I remember during the housing crash, or I remember during, they're going to go back in some ancient time when everything was in black and white, and you're going to say, well, what was different then than this is different now? Everything. And by the way, even during when there was interest rates that were 20% and mortgages were all, you guys know that there was a housing boom going on? Do you guys know that real estate was really rapidly appreciating? No one tells you that. So if you look at the growth curve for real estate agents in particular in our industry, and if you just think, if you're selling, for example, it doesn't matter what you're selling. If you have an unprecedented increase in demand for what you're selling, and what you're selling can't be sold digitally. It can't just be delegated to some AI avatar that's going to be doing all your work for you. In other words, people will always want to deal with a caring, competent professional about doing the real estate transaction. Like, you're going to have AI that's going to help doctors, but if you have a real, like Julie and I have these full body scans done at, what was it called? Prevenue. Okay.
Yeah.
We should put the code in there so these guys can get the discount. Anyway, so that aside, the first thing that there was an AI radiologist, right? That scanned it, and then the scans were reviewed again by a radiologist, and then that's the process.
It was in support of, not instead of. It was a tool that they were using and then interpreting. It was not doctor free, that's for sure.
And remember too, and this is something else that nobody talks about. So aside from the fact that humans will always want to rely on a caring, competent, skilled individual to help them with the life's biggest decisions, which guess what? Housing is always going to be one of them. Sure. You have to have a real estate license in order to be transferring information that's required to, that's required to have a real estate license. Did I say that right? So in every state, for you to basically be participating in a real estate transaction, unless you're selling your own home, you need, if you're brokering something, you need to have a real estate license. You need to be associated with the brokerage. So there's another reason why there's never been able to, that no one will ever be able to completely summarily, technology will never be able to summarily get rid of agents, because humans want to have somebody that they trust help them with a big stressful transaction. And the more expensive the house is, or the object is, the more they want a caring, competent professional. Isn't that interesting?
That's the more they expect it and demand it.
Exactly. Sure. But this is true for first-time buyers, but everybody. So you would think that after someone's bought and sold dozens of times, potentially real estate, and they're at the top of the real estate food chain, that they know how to do a deal, but they're the ones that most always want to have a real estate agent. Julie's coaching somebody right now who has an average sale price based on her sales so far this year of $8 million, $10 million probably.
Yeah.
Yeah. And she's dealing with very sophisticated buyers, and they don't, I mean, hell, they can look in the MLS, I suppose. They could go and figure out who the listing agent is, but they don't, because there's so much nuance.
They want her local knowledge and expertise and experience.
Right. So the idea that there's going to be so what am I getting at with all this, Julie, is we do believe, and we're looking for anybody to provide a contrary perspective on this. If you see blind spots in our arguments, let us know. But we know that there's going to be an enormous amount of new people and people wanting to buy and sell real estate. We know there's a shortage of inventory right now, 4 to 5 million homes. We know over the next 25 years, there's going to be literally over 10 million real estate transactions. We know there's trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars that are going to be floating around in the real estate segment. Why the hell won't there be a demand for more real estate agents? Why wouldn't there be a demand for not 1.6 million agents like we have now, but why wouldn't that number go to 5 million, 6 million, 8 million agents? It will, because there'll be enough demand and enough people will want to use the caring, competent, skilled individuals. We already know statistically that most people work with somebody that they've used in the past when choosing a service professional or a referral from a trusted friend or advisor. Guys, think about what I'm saying here. Real estate, being a real estate agent is going to be, without a doubt, one of the biggest growth sectors for the next 25 years in the U.S. economy. And who else is saying what we just said? Isn't that fascinating?
Yeah,
You argue against that.
No, I mean, people, and I think you make a good point that when people try to argue against it and try to argue real estate down, whether that's trying to convince you there's going to be a crash or it's not worth investing in, there's other things worth investing in, blah, blah, blah. And you ask them why. You either get no answer, you get a speculative answer, or you get them trying to make some corollary of this is exactly like that, which is, if you just looked at the facts, it's nothing like that. And, when you look at the projections of potentially 10 million sales by the time we wind through all this new construction and all the enthusiasm, I don't think if we're talking
per year, Julie.
Per year, right? And again, now we've had 3 years in a row of around 4 million. During the pandemic, it was about 6 million per year. So we're talking about a velocity of sales of about twice what we're used to. So of course, that's going to require both more agents, but we're looking at more sales. Now, does that sound unrealistic? I don't think so, considering our lack of inventory right now, and everybody that studies that has said we're off by 4 to 5 million. So you would ask yourself the question, especially with 140 million millennials and Gen Z people that are coming of age and forming their households, if we had 1 million more homes for sale tomorrow, what do you think would happen? They'd all sell. We'd have a year of over 5 million sales instead of over 4 million sales.
And people are saying these sales will be dominated by real estate teams. I don't think that's even remotely true. Real estate teams they're already morphing into, there'll always be real estate teams, small businesses like little team brokerage hybrids. That'll always be a valid business model. But the cost, the revenue model on the buyer agent side of those businesses has really been eviscerated. Its buyer agent commissions have take a setback and all the referral fees. So you're going to see new hybrid models around teams that are going to start forming. But here's some actual numbers. In 2025, this is what we're predicting: 4.5 million sales. In 2030, 5 years, right? We're expecting 6 million sales. In 2040, we're expecting 8 million sales. In 2050, 25 years from now, 10 million sales. And so if you think about the number of agents that's going to be necessary just to fulfill the number of transactions that will be available out there, it's truly extraordinary. And Julie, let's get to point number 13.
Hang on, I have to scan down here. Okay.
I'll start it. You got it?
Yep.
You see it? Okay.
I got it. The 2025 wealth transference effect. Trillions fuel the boom. So get ready as 2025 unleashes a $68 trillion wealth tsunami as 76 million boomers transfer the biggest handoff by or between now and 2050. And if you want to know all of our sources, get the newsletter. With 40% in real estate, 27 trillion in homes and land, that's according to the Federal Reserve. Heirs, H-E-I-R-S, pour 10 to 15 trillion into homes over 25 years. Why? Because 65% of millennials and Gen Z target property. They do want to buy homes. Of course they do. So using 100,000 plus inheritances for $400,000 homes, a $1 million boomer sale in 2025 funds three $300,000 buys by 2030. Tripling sales. Again, we're seeing the impact of those, both the demographics and the wealth transference. That triples sales. That's our, turbocharger flooding the market and supercharging that trajectory over 25 years.
So yeah, it's incredible. So the wealth transference that, you could say officially starts this year. I don't think that's a real way of saying it, but that's, the easiest way of understanding it is in the trillions of dollars. The money is going to be inherited by younger folks, their heirs, and that money is going to be largely going to, guess what? Real estate transactions. We already talked about the effect of tariffs. We already talked about the effect of new construction. We already talked about the effect of all the, these new towns that are going to be formed. And you guys go back and listen to the last 2 days. You give me one reason why you shouldn't be bouncing off the walls optimistic about what's happening in housing.
Well, that's
Tell me
right. And
one.
we're right now with our lack of inventory and our higher than we'd like interest rates. Housing already accounts for about 30% of GDP. Imagine what it's going to be when everything is unleashed and we start building again and there's, rates come down a bit. And by the way, because we didn't spend a huge amount of time talking about interest rates in this particular two-part show, of course, we're sensitive to that being a factor. But unlike when we were about 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, when we went from an average of 3.5% for interest rates all the way up to 7%, that was shocking. People weren't used to that. That was like earth shattering for those 6 to 8 months, maybe even 18 months. So now people have kind of gotten used to the idea that we're not going to see 3.5 or 4.5%, maybe not even 5%, maybe never again. Okay. But we've had time to get used to that. And based on mortgage application data, as soon as we got into that 6.75%, and for a while we were getting to 6.5%, I think every single week this year, we've had an increase in mortgage applications. Now, we were at kind of a bottom with the housing recession for 2 years. So it's a modest increase, but every single week has been an increase. And that's without even getting to an average of 6.5%. So everybody who looks at this is talking about 6.25%, 6%, somewhere between 6 and 6.5 should make a significant dent. Now, that said, we've also done extensive podcasts about how you and your buyers can achieve a better than market rate interest rate. Many different ways. We've drilled down on that on podcasts. And by the way, just to bring this all full circle with the new construction, now, we talk a lot. I think I'm going to do a podcast just dedicated to builder incentives. We're used to builders subsidizing the interest rate and buying down the rate. Typically right now, if rates are 6.75%, you can close at 5.5%, maybe even 5.25%. There are some builders that are under 5% with an adjustable year. So the first year is less, then it adjusts a little bit up, but you still end up better than market rate. Now what we're seeing, to talk to the affordability end of things, some builders are adding on to those incentives, or for some buyers, maybe instead of that, they're doing first-time buyer, down payment assistance. They're doing grant money. They're doing all kinds of creative financing. And that's before Fannie and Freddie have even been taken out of conservatorship and made the market more competitive. So I think there's probably a spinoff show just about, mortgage aspect of all of this. But the fact that builders are throwing some first-time buyer money, some builders are, I think that shows you we're all working on this affordability thing together. And it's not just about purchase price. There's all of these other widgets and widgets that are going on. All good stuff.
As make housing great again, which we do think, we're definitely borrowing that line from Trump, and we do believe.
Pulte said it last year or last week.
He said it once, right?
Yeah.
So I wrote something down, Julie. You sparked a thought. It's something that Warren Buffett said. He said, when others are greedy, be fearful, and when they're fearful, be greedy. And I'll say right now, there's a carryover of fear in the housing industry. The prevailing sense is of mostly like people don't know necessarily what to think or what actions to take. So I would say that's in the fear category. So when other people are fearful, according to Warren Buffett, you should be greedy. Now, greedy maybe is not the best choice of words, but you need to start thinking in terms of using the points that we just gave you guys to feel optimistic. And so your mindset is what matters now. Because if you are not doing the things necessary now for you to lock in your improvement, your betterment of your future, you're going to basically miss an opportunity. There's some people that show up in our life occasionally that have been listening to Julie and I since the housing crash, and they missed the run up in housing, they missed the recovery in housing, and now we're going through this, hopefully the tail end of this housing recession, if not depression. And they have already missed the run up and the rundown. Because what happens, they went to ground, emotionally with their mindset. They never came back out. And we've seen that happen every time there's any kind of meaningful setback in people's lives, not just in their businesses and the real estate businesses. A lot of them never come back. So you've really got to be monitoring your mindset. And unless you can come up with a real valid reason why our call for massive optimism isn't, a good mindset to have unless you can come up with something we haven't thought about, alien visitation aside. And hell, you know what? Those little buggers are going to need a place to live too. I
That's
mean,
right.
there could be a surge in alien homes. You don't know. I don't know, right? I mean, UFO, you have people that are basically buying these houses where they can fly their planes and the aircraft hangars on their properties. You hear about those stories sometimes. Well, maybe aliens want a big ass garage to store their UFO. I mean, who knows, right? Another surge. We
You
could do
never
it.
know.
Yeah, but so if your mindset isn't that of overwhelming optimism, what's going to happen is look, we're all about hope for the best, but be prepared for the worst. But if you're spending too much time not just being prepared for the worst, but living as if it is the worst, you're going to lose too much time. And that's unfortunate for you because the greatest housing boom in the history of maybe the world is starting now. And it's going to last a generation. A generation is by definition 25 years. And if you want our notes, and there's a ton of notes from today's show, as always, go to harrisrealestatedaily.com and subscribe to the newsletter. And the notes are free. The subscription is free, harrisrealestatedaily.com. And always, the next natural step for all of you to take right now is to join us at Premier Coaching. If you like our vibe, if you like how we think, if you like the nature of what you learn from this podcast, you will not believe how much we reinforce it on Premier Coaching. Premier Coaching now does include Ethical Real Estate Professional. You'll learn more about that when you go to premiercoaching.com. Just scroll down the page and you can read about it. Or you could just text the word Premier to 47372 if you want to go about it that way. But those are my calls to action for you. Make sure you're a subscriber to the newsletter. Julie and I create a lot of unique content just for newsletter subscribers, and absolutely positively join our community with Premier Coaching. Go to premiercoaching.com. You can join now, have immediate access to all of the first level of Premier Coaching for free. No contracts, no gotchas, no nothing. You just join Premier Coaching. In the first 30 days, you're going to love your experience and you're going to stay an enrolled member. And if you choose it's not for you, that's fine. You can just cancel. But the move for you to make now is to realize the best years of your life, not just of your real estate business, are still ahead of you. Go you! You were smart enough to get a real estate license. You're smart enough to listen to this podcast. Now you got to be smart enough to take the information and hopefully the inspiration we gave you from today's show, take it forward into your future and make this the next, however many years God gives you, right? Whether it's 25 years, whether it's 10 years, doesn't matter what your age is. Make this the next 25 years the best 25 years of your life. Don't delay. Don't wait around and, do a survey on Facebook. Just act as if, and you'll be shocked what you can accomplish in a short period of time because of this housing boom. Have a fantastic day. We'll talk with you on the show tomorrow.